Welcome, everyone, to a very special episode of Legends and Lectures. I'm here with Jeremiah McCall on Dragon Quest Day.
Yay!
Dragon Quest Day celebrates 40 years today, which tells you how old both of us are, because we both, we both know it. But more importantly, we're here to talk about Jeremiah's work with gaming the past and how games in general are used for education. So, Jeremiah, for those who don't know you, please tell everybody a little bit about what you do.
Sure. So I am a career-long high school history teacher. I've been teaching 26 years now.
Oh boy.
Uh, I know the last 24 here at Cincinnati Country Day School, where I will assuredly retire from in case or unless something really horrible happens. Let's hope not. Um, and so my PhD is in Greco-Roman history from Ohio State. And I do a lot of work with historical games in history classes and history education, and also some work in historical game studies, which is sort of the academic side of that. So yeah, I have my students make games and I have my students play games, and I'm really annoying about requiring them to answer their own questions and come up with their own meanings and give their own evidence and stuff like that. Now somebody's knocking at my door, but I'm going to ignore them because I'm on this with you. But maybe I'll look over in case, oh, they went away. So fair enough. See, that's the kind of stuff you don't ordinarily get if it's just an audio podcast. So there we go. And I'm delighted to be here.
Thank you. I know it's exam time, and I appreciate you making time for us. But
Absolutely.
I wanted you to come here because I specifically wanted to talk about edutainment, which, as we know, when we was growing up in them days, edutainment was a big thing. And when I was young, we had computer class. It was the original computer. We had the original
Mhm.
Microsoft computers. And even though now you might play something, let's say like Minecraft or Rome Total War, if you're, teaching history or something. Did the kids still play Rome Total War? Maybe not. I don't know. Maybe we're too
No, they
old.
really don't. Well, I mean, that's like an entire side thing, right? Is that kids don't play cool computer games most of the time. They play whatever's on their mobile, or maybe if they're really sophisticated, they have like a console with some decent games. But it's not, yeah.
But this
Rome
is
Total
always
War is
this
not on
is
their
my
list.
gripe. This is the gripe that I have, which is partly why I wanted to talk to you because when we were young, we had so many edutainment games. We had all the Learning Company games, Mech, Broderbund, like Where in the World is Carmen Sandiego. I
Mhm,
grew
mhm.
up playing Word Munchers, Number Munchers, Treasure
Yep.
Mountain, Treasure Cove, Operation Neptune. Reader Rabbit was huge when I was younger. Math Blaster, of course,
Mhm,
and
mhm.
everybody remembers Oregon Trail for
Of
sure.
course.
To the point that older millennials like me some people have dubbed us the Oregon Trail generation because computers were just coming up. I remember Gizmos and Gadgets, Magic School Bus game,
Mhm.
and more important, I remember Microsoft had a whole Microsoft Home series, CD-ROM series
Oh, interesting.
that had all this entertainment software and games. So they had Fine Artist, Creative Writer with Mixie, which I loved, which I credit to maybe badly for me wanting to become a writer because I loved it so much. I used to make my own books at home with Creative Writer. They had Animal Fun, which I played, and of course, the very amazing Encarta Encyclopedia. That was part of
Yeah,
Microsoft Home, and we all played
I
the Mind
remember.
Maze to death. And people might not remember these things. Maybe they remember Mind Maze and the Jester, but like making education a dungeon crawler, it was absolute genius.
Mm,
And
mm.
I look at things like this and I go, why don't we have these things anymore? These were perfect for being in a classroom. People don't remember that Microsoft Home series, but there was tons of educational stuff, not only encyclopedias, but Flight Simulator came out of it. And while
Right, right,
and
for
while
sure.
Flight Simulator is now its own thing, this is where it came from, this whole edutainment aspect of it. So do you remember any of these things when you were younger, and how much did these things influence you?
Well, so only a little bit. I've got about 12 years on you. And so you're describing the 90s pretty well. And I would have been a kid in the 80s. So I did have a computer lab, and we were using, old school logo, making the little tortoise move around. And we did have Oregon Trail. I probably played the 1983 5 or 6 version of it or something like that. So I have some memory of that. It's interesting because edutainment, you have such a positive response to it, and that's really really cool. It's come under a lot of flack, really, as a concept. But yeah, I mean, it was a very interesting time. I remember Encarta, now that you mention it, and I remember just how neat it was to think about like CD-ROMs and all the stuff you could have on there before the internet. So yeah, it was an interesting time. I think I don't know, as you know, I kind of my lane is pretty much history and history
Hmm.
education. So I don't know what's going on, sort of like in the bigger fields there. But my sense is that in history anyways, what I've been trying to do is move away from sort of the gamifying, move away from taking whatever you're doing and turning into a game, but instead just using the games
Hmm.
themselves as something interesting. And I don't really know where that is in sort of ed tech today.
Nowhere.
um
That's why
yeah,
that's why you're here.
yeah,
Nowhere.
no, I think you may be right. I think um there's and by the way, totally not to rain on your parade for loving edutainment. I think it's fantastic, like how much you like got from these things. I was just suggesting, I think what happened is, what did happen?
What
I
did
mean,
though? But that's the question. That's the question. What did happen? Because Nintendo took up the cup. They started doing things like Big Brain Academy was huge,
Mhm.
huge in the day, and even Brain Age, huge. But after the Wii and DS era, these things really declined. And even though there are some edutainment games still in Japan, and all, they've just or even I would say programs now, right? Because you can
Right,
actually take their actual educational courses that you could take through online through a gamified sort of thing. And they've just completely disappeared. Like I know people teach with Minecraft. I know people teach like low-key engineering for kids with Minecraft, the
right.
educational version. I know people use Civ for obviously civilization for history. I know people teach archaeology with World of Warcraft. But in general, the that whole aspect has gone. And I always tell them I always use games as an educational tool for kids who let's say are struggling. And so when it comes to let's say kids who are having difficulty reading, let's say they can't read a book. So you know
Right.
what? You like games? I want you to pick an old school RPG. I want you to pick like Final Fantasy VI. And then I want you to play it. And that will just because there's no voices, right? But it forces them to read.
Right.
And they don't realize that they're reading 100,000 lines of dialogue, but they have to
Right.
if they want to get through the game. And so even games like that can be used in an educational capacity.
Okay,
So
that's
tell us a
helpful.
little bit about how you use games in the classroom.
Okay, I'm glad you told me some more because I see where you're coming from. Um, so get first of all, first disclaimer. I'm not a butthead. I'm really not. So if I feel like there's like sort of certain definitions that make more sense to me, that's just from my environment and my bubble and stuff like that. And secondly, who the hell's going to be in charge of these things anyways? But I think what I would do is distinguish. To me, you're talking about several really different uses of games, and
Hmm.
that fascinates me. Edutainment. I don't know anybody who uses that as a good word except for you, which is really kind of interesting.
I
And I
think I think
think
it's because edutainment has been taken over, let's say, by something like Duolingo, which I do not recommend as a language learning software. And I would rather say that Duolingo has gamified education rather than edutainment. Edutainment is something that is entertaining you, but also educating you at the same time. So
yeah,
something like Sesame Street, that I would say when we were kids would be edutainment. Whereas
yeah, yeah.
Duolingo, I would say, is gamifying learning. And I don't actually think that you can learn language well from something like Duolingo because it'll teach you vocabulary and it might teach you basic grammar. It does not teach you practical application, and that's the biggest problem. So I
So
d
yeah.
mm.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was just going to say, yeah. So we're exactly on the same page. I just would have said that edutainment was that stuff like Duolingo because that's usually why it gets the bad name. But anyways, ditching that because it doesn't really matter what we call it. What you were saying it makes a lot of sense, right? It seems like you had several different uses. The reason stuff like Math Blasters went away is because it's not integrated into the game system. Where we get sort of that bad meaning of edutainment, right? You're flying through the sewer or something. I did one once. I mean, it was way after my time, but I wanted to at least say I'd looked at it. And I just remember flying through a sewer or something, and then there was an octopus, and the octopus had arms with multiplication things on them. And there was nothing about the content that was linked to the thing that they were trying to learn. There was nothing mathematical about the content. It was just quizzing you. And so, yeah, that's the kind that a lot of that kind of qualified as. It was chocolate covered broccoli is the kind of phrase that a lot of people used at the time, right? It's kind of these school facts they drill you on, but then they try to make it look a little better. But what you were talking about were a couple of different things. One, I think, and I think they're an important distinction. You were first of all not my area, but I picked up on it as soon as you said it. That idea of building literacy through
Hmm.
having kids engage with RPGs and stuff like that. That's not what we kind of consider the drill and kill put into video game form that is often associated with that word edutainment. That's right, understanding literacy as something being more wide and more complex than just reading a book. So that's cool. That's a really good use of it. And then you also, I mean, not that I'm the arbiter of what's cool and how to use it. Sorry, I'm very well aware that I'm very well aware that lots of people like to make grand statements and think that they've got the answer to everything, and I do not have the answer to most things. Anyway, you were saying civilization and stuff like that. That for me is my sweet spot. So for me, I'm interested in games that for history education, where the game itself has at least a reasonable model. I call them defensible models
Hmm.
about the past. It's not going to be accurate all the way through. Don't even know what that means. It's not going to be used as a textbook to kind of pull stuff in, but what it's going to do, I think, is give you what I call a historical problem space, a situation where you're taking on the role of a past actor, trying to figure out how to do stuff. And so for me, that's the opposite side of the Math Blasters spectrum, where the historical content itself ideally is in the game. So you're not delivering content. Computers suck at that. Computer games suck at delivering content. They're no good at that. Rather, you're looking at systems and models and kind of critiquing those. So that's kind of my big approach.
So, what games do you do would you use for history? We talked for like
Yeah.
a few seconds about, I don't think the kids are playing Rome Total War, but that was a
No,
great
they are
one.
not. I used to make them. I first started using computer games in the classroom here 20 years ago, and we have a laptop program. I'm really fortunate to be in this school with those resources. And we used to use demo discs. I was able to get demos of Rome Total War. Was one of the first games I used
Nice.
back in like 2007 or something. Yeah. So what I use now, well, so like this year I didn't actually use computer games very much because I've been having sort of this board game renaissance in my life. But the games that I've used the most over the past like video games over the past 5 years. There's a good city builder called Nebuchadnezzar that I like,
Hmm.
where you're building a Babylonian city for my ninth graders. There is Through the Darkest of Times, which is a great game about resisting the Nazis. I use that with my 10th graders. Um, I used to use Civilization a lot, and I found so actually like the first time I ever spoke publicly on games and history was actually like 21 years ago this month, and it was on Civ. And what I found is Civilization is a fantastic game. It never really worked with my teaching style because I like deep dives. And so I did better with a game like Nebuchadnezzar, where it's like, okay, let's do a Mesopotamian deep dive and look at sources and stuff. Whereas Civilization was always like grand swath of history. But if you're doing grand swath of history, it's a really good game to use. So those are probably like my top three. There's a great not because it's appropriate, but great because it's useful. Colonizer focused game called It's a remake. It's Seven Cities of Gold, but it's not the original one. It's the one that was remade in 93 and everybody hated it, but it's on Internet Archive. And you are so clearly like conquistador point of view, which just is great for picking at that and talking about what was considered acceptable in 1993 for a game. Would that still be acceptable now? So those are some of the games I use.
Oh, that's very interesting that you think about it from that point of view. Like I say, I know lots of people who use games in the classroom, but at different capacity, and it's interesting to see how, especially strategy games, historical ones, are really the ones that have stood the test of time. Because we
Mm-hmm.
talk about where did strategy games go? Where did they go? And a
Mm-hmm.
lot of them, when I was in university in the early 2000s, we had tons of strategy games. Obviously, there was StarCraft, and there were all the original
Mm-hmm.
Warcraft series. I played the heck out of Warcraft 3, but those things are now. I don't know whether they're popular in certain places, usually in Europe and East Asia, but for some reason they have just died out in North America, and I think that they really were and are really great educational tool for many things, obviously
Mm-hmm.
for learning history, but also strategies, teaching critical thinking.
Mm-hmm.
How are you
Mm-hmm.
going to get around this person? How are you going to outsmart
Yeah.
them? And people don't realize in history, people played war games. That's what they did.
Sure, absolutely. No, I think you're right. I mean, strategy games are, I mean, usually I have to go with indie game developers, which I like
Hmm.
anyways. But, with the exception of Civilization, right? The big market history games are going to be third-person shooters and Assassin's Creed. And Assassin's Creed I mean, fantastic game. Nothing that I'm saying here is any shade on anybody's like actual game or how I feel about it as a game player. It's really more kind of like how can I use it in a classroom? And the so the thing about Assassin's Creed. Oh, okay,
You'll
so
notice I did not mention it for a very
yeah,
specific, yeah.
yeah. Well, so the thing about that is even if you take the Discovery Tour, um, Assassin's Creed is going to help show you to some extent what a historical place looked like.
Mm.
The only things you can actually do in there historically are wander around and see the sites. Then most of the history is so most of the history is conveyed from that and from your cutscene dialogues. So you're not actually doing anything that's historical because parkour and assassinations like rampantly like that are, I mean, there's no historical analog for that did all that stuff. So if you compare that to many strategy games where you're actually making decisions that are kind of like what people in history did, it's just kind of a richer audience. The other thing is, right, you got to drop 70 hours into an Assassin's Creed to have it make sense. But I mean, I guess maybe I want to bring up at this point too that for me it's all about critique. It's all about giving my kids either through my lectures or through the readings they do or stuff like that or our discussions, the ability to criticize the game and say, hey, this part really fits the evidence. It's what I call like defensible, and this part really does not. So I'm definitely not saying like Civilization compared to Assassin's Creed like is a more accurate thing. That's kind of a problematic statement. I'm just saying like the actual gameplay is more of an analogy to what at least a state would have done, not an individual, but like a state.
Oh yeah, I go on about this all the time. How Assassin's Creed not accurate at all, and it's gotten less accurate as time's gone on. We've had whole discussions about Assassin's Creed Valhalla and us going, why are there druids in this game? This is the Viking
Because
Age.
they're
Why are there
cool.
druids in this
They
game?
sing. They sing to oak trees. I don't actually know. By the way, that was no shade on modern druids. I was just being ignorant about
No,
ancient.
they're obviously they're very, very different. But
Yeah. I'll take your word for it. I'm ignorant on most things in the world. Not video games, not ancient history, and not teaching ninth and 10th graders, but so many other things do I not know.
So when it comes to teaching strategy games, you said that you started incorporating board games or tabletop games as well. And this is kind of where I feel like strategy games have moved on in terms of because obviously, as we said, wargaming has been around throughout history. We could talk about things like Warhammer, or we could talk about as well like the old Napoleon games that
Right,
people
for
play,
sure.
or even the World War II games that people play. But I think that since with the board game renaissance of the early 2000s, I really think that strategy games have sort of moved away a little bit. There still are some on Steam that you can find, but they've moved away a little bit from um, the online gaming sphere. Maybe we could argue something like Baldur's Gate 3 obviously could be it's an RPG, but yes, because it's turn-based, we could see that there's some strategy in it. But I think that the board game or the tabletop space has really expanded on
Mm-hmm.
the educational and strategy game field. So can you tell us a little bit about what tabletop games you use? Please don't say diplomacy. Please don't say diplomacy.
Okay, but I got to ask you later why you don't want me to say diplomacy, but I'm
No,
not actually using it right now.
I just hate that game.
Well, come on, wait a minute. I'm gonna go get my garage
Of
sale
course, I
old
knew
version.
it.
Look at that.
Of course.
Um,
Beautiful box. Beautiful
I
box.
did use diplomacy in a class once, but I haven't used it in a long time. So okay, um, I so when I wrote Gaming the Past, so I wrote Gaming the Past. Actually, Gaming the Past came out 15 years ago, like 3 days from now or something like that. I was like, wait a minute, I feel old. Let me look that up. And this is what happened. And I did a second edition in 2023. It's basically all about how history teachers can use video games to do critical analysis in history. And I think two things happened that shifted me to board games for the moment. I'm not done with video games. I just took a break. One, maybe three things. I always say that to my kids. I'll be like, my students, they're like, "There's two things that caused this," and then I'll list five. Um, One is I had done video games. I felt pretty comfortable that I had already written the book I wanted to write on how to use video games in the classroom, and I'm
Hmm.
always learning, so something new there. But two, you said, right, this board game renaissance. Um, um, there are games now. I mean, like when I wrote the first Gaming the Past, there were barely any historical board games out there that you could play. You know, they were all like those Napoleonic games and stuff where you had, right, the combat results table, yeah, the combat results table and all that jazz. And now there are so many games that are reasonable to play. So what I found is, and so I kind of wanted to do that frontier, and that's why I started moving into the next book that's coming up. That's on how to like have teachers design them board games. Anyway, what I found was board games like when they were all really hard like to play and hard to find, logistically it was so much easier to use a video game. But now that they've all gotten easier and they're easier to kind of find and they're not necessarily always incredibly hard to purchase, it's actually a lot more logistically friendly to have my students play a board game a lot of
Hmm.
the time. So that's kind of all come together, I think, in the last sort of decade or so. But I use let's see, I should like promote, right? I use, since right, theoretically somebody might actually want to watch this video even though you said most people like the audio. So there we go, we
Ah,
got
roll
Roll
through the
Dig,
ages. That's
the
a good one.
Bronze Age. Love this game. And diplom no, I don't use diplomacy, sorry, that was just
I'd always joke about diplomacy, risk, and like Twilight Imperium. Please do not talk to me about Twilight
they are not
Imperium.
yeah, risk is fun, but it's not a model of
Yeah,
anything.
Seven Wonders is great. I love Seven Wonders.
And this is the architect's version, which is nice. It is not, so you have to oh, this is a good one I use with my 10th graders. Crisis 1914. That's a really good one for World
Oh,
War One.
nice.
Um, when you're using games with teenagers, you have to forget the age minimums for learning a game, in my experience. I love teaching teenagers. It's been like such a great journey the past like quarter century. But if you're forcing a kid to play a game in a class, forget everything you think about like how easy it will be for them to learn to play and how they will be overjoyed the whole time and it will be easy. No, there will be some kids that'll do that, but there'll be a lot of kids that go, I don't like this. This is like nothing I've experienced. I don't really want to do this. I mean, if it's new in the year, I don't really trust you, weird teacher person. And so you need easy games, is my experience. And
Hmm.
so like Seven Wonders Architects is the stripped down simplified Seven Wonders, and it works really, really well. So I use games like that. I make board games. Sometimes I've designed a few that I use with my kids. And then now one of my big things is having my students actually design their own. So they have to research and design their own history games, which is
That's
cool.
great. I think that's great. Make them do the work. You
It
also
takes so much to figure out. Like you have to know a subject to make a game about it. You really do.
You also incorporated as well interactive text. And I think this is great
Mm-hmm.
because as well like especially with the choose your own we grew up obviously with choose your own adventure. But we did have educational ones and
Mm-hmm.
there's the I think the engine there's an engine from Inkle that who have made
Yep.
many different interactive text games that you can use, and same thing with the choose your own people, they have their engine online for people to use for free.
Yeah.
So please tell us how you use interactive text to teach.
So, it, like, it was 20 years ago. I first taught a historical simulations class for my high school seniors. And it was based on that kind of insight that you have to know something really well to be able to make a game about it. And so it was physical games because that's what we were kind of able to do logistically.
Mm,
And I wanted there to be some computer option, but what I found over time was um, for me, since I'm a history teacher, there has to be we have to focus on that. We have to focus on reading our sources and discussing them and figuring out what it means. We can't spend like 50% of the year learning a programming tool. So it's got to have a very what small footprint. I don't know what you have to call it. It has to have very little overhead for it to be a tool where my students could use it and still be focusing on the history. So first thing I ran into was actually Inform 7. I don't know if you know. Do you remember parser-based games like Zork and stuff like that?
oh yeah, sure, yeah.
So Inform 7 was a tool that allowed you to use English statements. I mean, they were still pretty strict about what you could do because it was coding, but English statements to make a puzzle-based game. And so I was like, okay, that's easy enough. And so I worked with having my students do that. And that I really liked doing that, but the puzzle game format isn't really conducive to doing a lot of history things necessarily. So it wasn't until I found Twine, because that's where I came in for interactive texts,
Hmm.
and that must have been maybe about a decade ago. And so that was my earlier kind of work of the last decade. I basically had students research. They had to pick a character, a historical character in a period, and they had to research the character and develop a plot outline and make the twine. And I still have them up on I have my like exemplars up on Gaming the Past, my website. And you can see in them that they have to put in footnotes to discuss the historical backing of the things they're doing. They have to have a big bibliography. They're writing drafts. So that's been sort of a mainstay. That's been like a first semester project for me for, like I said, a decade. And it is such a good tool for thinking about characters and agency because, right, choice-based text, interactive fiction of that style boils it all down. There's often not a world model. It's not really simulating much. Rather, it's giving you like this description of an agent and the actions they can make. And you could write it any old way you want, but if you wrote it in a way that was kind of focusing on the history, you can really explore a character and their motives and the results of their actions and stuff like that. So I have my students doing a lot of that.
And so for gaming the past, what is going to be next to add to it, do you think? Or perhaps you find that you want to incorporate games in another way.
So right now, I've really been focusing on the design side. I still have my students play a lot of games because I think that's helpful. But well, it's really helpful. But if I had to choose, if it was like you only get one of these, I would have my kids make games every time because the thinking and the research and the play testing, everything like that is really really powerful. But I don't have to choose, so I have them play all sorts of games and critique all sorts of games and build all sorts of games. Not the only thing we do. My colleagues and I like to tease myself about that. There is a lot going on. I happen, for example, to be really particular about wanting my kids to write well, and don't even get me started on LLMs can do it for you because they can't. Um, and they shouldn't. And it's really bad for the environment. Look, I got myself started. Jeez.
Oh,
Okay.
you're preaching to the choir here.
I knew,
We tell
see,
them
I
all the
knew that,
time.
but I knew that. So I've so this next book that's coming out in August, Designing Historical Games, I'm really excited about because it goes through and says, teachers, if you want to make board games that are historical, to do that kind of thing we were talking about at the beginning, where the history is part of the game model, not like a tack on. Or if you want to make interactive texts, and I describe most of it in Twine, but I definitely point out ink. That's a great tool too. Then this book will show you how to do them, but it'll also show you how to guide students through. How do you assess it? How do you support it and stuff? And then, yeah, I don't know what the next frontier is. I uh, I have so I think for me, I about 13 years ago came up with this framework that I call the historical problem space framework. And it's basically, how do you analyze a game history? Because games are games about history are histories.
Hmm.
If we understand that histories are selective interpretations of the past, and there's no rule that says selective interpretations of the past need to be written, it's just they have been for so long that some people forget and think that that's the only way you can do things. Um, so I spend a lot of time talking about this idea of how games about history always have some kind of agent, and that agent always has goals, and those goals are contextualized in a game world, and you get to make choices about how to achieve those goals. This is true of Dragon Quest too. This is true of
It's
every
true.
game that has an agent in it. But what it does is it makes history in a game different, because as much as we might think, particularly if all we're going on is like what our teachers told us in middle school on history, we might think that the world is full of rational actors with clearly defined goals that are making choices that are optimal for trying to, yeah, exactly, right. But I don't think anybody in history anymore thinks that, anybody like academically studying history. And if teachers are teaching it that way, I'm sorry, that's just not how it's working. Right. I mean, go read Freud. Not that I'm, anyways, that's a long digression. Um, so I've been spending a lot of time, and I really got to do some of this with this latest book, kind of laying out, here's how you should analyze a game, or a good way to. It's not the only way. And like, these are the different components and stuff. And if you're interested, I've got articles. You can find me. I have them all on my Game in the Past website. So I think that's what I'm going to do next. My partner is very much encouraging me, and I agree completely to not write another book for a while. This is my seventh book that I've written, and I have been under contract for a book for the last 15 years straight. And it's time to rest.
Okay, so I won't press you too much.
It's time to, no, but but I think that's what I'm going to do next. When I actually get another book in me, it probably won't be a history book. It'll probably be a, let's look at games as history and just like lay out all of that, and with examples and board games and computer games. You think they're different, but they're all
Oh no.
problem spaces and stuff
Yes.
like that. So I think that's where I'm going next.
Wonderful. Well, whenever that does come out, I hope you'll come back and tell us about it. And we can really
I will.
deliciate over the games as a history, because that's really part of my jam. That's what I do as well. And
I'd love that. That would be great.
yeah, fantastic.
Go find Gaming in the Past, the website. I've been doing it for 15 years. There is nothing I've written other than like Gaming in the Past, the book, that you can't get for free on my site in some kind of published article form. And I love talking shop. So, cold email me, tell me you want to talk about something involving these things, and I'm always happy to do it.